Sandra?
I have a very different question.
Yeah, just with the mic.
Sorry.
Yeah, watch the police.
I feel you guys are going away.
Yep.
And I feel for like being addicted to being here, to have a relationship with God. Like you're my only inspiration. It feels like, and I feel like we're wasting
wasting time talking about illnesses.
Well, we could be talking about God, and how do we maintain a relationship with God while we're away?
Let's look at what interferes with your relationship with God. If you look at what interferes with your relationship with God the most, isn't it your addictions? They are also the thing that cause most of your illnesses. So everything is quite related when it comes to your spiritual progress. Most people don't realise, one of the reasons why I answer people's questions about physical matters, is because there's a deep relationship between the physical matter and the love issue. There's a deep relationship between those two things. And so it's important to trace everything back to there being a love issue. And when it comes to our relationship with God, of course, if we're focused on our relationship with God, we'll sort out all issues. But if we're only focused on our relationship with people, we won't sort out our issues, because other people will want us to be in addiction with them. And remember last week, Paul asked the question, I think it was last week or the week before. Last week I think it was, where Paul said, well, what are the most important things to focus on? And he was trying to tell me, remember, that love of people he was surprised that love of people wasn't my first thing. And you can see the danger of just sort of ignoring God and just attempting to love people. If you ignore God in the process of loving people, then eventually what you're going to do is just feed what people want. Now, the problem is, what people want is not what they need. It's frequently addictions is what they want, which is not what they need. What they need is to be free of them. Right? So if you focus your relationship on God first, now there's a chance that you'll be able to sort out everything, not only yourself, but also all the problems with your relationship and all those kind of things. Now, remember, Ivana raised the issue, well, what happens if you don't have a relationship, you don't feel God exists? Well, of course, that's a huge issue to resolve. Now, it's interesting because a lot of conversations in the past we've had where, we've met with groups of people start asking me questions about all sorts of, you could say, physical and emotional and spiritual matters. And I'm perfectly happy to answer those questions if that's the desire of the group, to answer those questions. But my desire is for every group that we ever talk to start understanding that actually none of the questions that you're asking are really valid if you don't consider the very primary question, which is, does God exist? Is a relationship with God possible? And how do I achieve that? Right? If God doesn't exist, there is little point in discussing a relationship with God or whether a relationship with God is possible. Isn't that true? Mm-hmm. If God doesn't exist, then the second two things are not possible, right? But if God does exist, you can see that fundamentally there's some basic, if it is true that God exists, there's some very fundamental problems questions we need to start asking ourselves about that. And those questions, and as we proceed with those questions, what I found in the first century for myself was that as I proceeded along the lines of that questioning, once I established that God did exist, it helped me greatly in my personal life in all other aspects of my life. And this is why I said, seek first the kingdom and all these other things will be added to you. Right? It's a statement that if you read the Bible, you'll see it was in the Bible. Seek first the kingdom and all these other things will be understood eventually. All these other things will be given to you. The knowledge of these things will be given to you. What I see many people doing is they're not seeking first their relationship with God. Right? and I see it happening a lot with people with relationships. So in other words, with myself and Mary, you know, we could seek first our relationship. That could be a choice we could make, isn't it? So that we stay together for as long as possible, because I love her and she loves me, or we think we do, and so we want to stay together, and we're happy to, and so we're happy to work on anything that keeps us together. Now, most people are not even willing to do that, by the way. Like, many of you are not even willing to do that. Like, you're happy for there to be friction and conflict between both of you, and for the most part, what you do is you ignore it. You're happy for it to be there. When I say happy, you're happy to not deal with it. Right? Now, that's not the approach I take, because I know anything that's undealt with in a relationship is going to come back and bite you in the relationship at some point. So let's say I'm treating Mary badly. Let's say I just, like, we both work, and let's say we both work at even times, but Mary's the one who comes home and cleans the house. Right? Just a simple thing like that. Now, that's a big emotional and spiritual problem that I have, actually. A huge one. Because it demonstrates a lack of love, a lack of personal responsibility, and a number of other problems that I have. And if Mary doesn't say anything about it, and she sort of just goes, well, that's my lot in life, I'm a woman, and I've been taught the good woman does this, and this is me being a good wife. And if she accepts that bad construct in her own mind and her own feelings, and she continues to do it, what's going to happen between us is that the problem will fester to the point where it may even break us up in the future. And this is why many people, when they look at a breakup, they start listing all the things that were done wrong for 25 years. Not what was done wrong last week, but all the things that were done wrong for 25 years that they tolerated, and now what happened last week was just the last straw that broke the camel's back, the camel being the relationship. And the net result of that is that we're storing all of this stuff up, and we're unwilling to deal with it for years and years and years and years. Firstly, we're unwilling to deal with our own thing, and we can easily see that we're unwilling to deal with our own thing, because as we get older, we get sicker. We get more infirm. We have more accidents. We have more sicknesses generally. We have more difficulties moving around. So that is indicative of the fact that we're not dealing with our own stuff. And then on top of that, anything related to the relationship with the person I say I love, but obviously don't love enough to deal with my own stuff, right? And so the relationship also potentially breaks down, and this is why you see people usually who are in their later years, you see very poor but tolerant, they tolerate each other, and basically fundamentally many of them live almost separate lives, right? But they're still married. We've been married for 50 years. My mum and dad have been married. My mum was married when she was 16. And she's now 70. Well, I think she's now 77. So what's that? 52. 77 take 15, 52 years. So they have their 50-year anniversary, and there we go. Isn't it amazing? My mum and dad can barely stand each other. But they do care for each other. Like, dad looks after mum when she's sick, and mum looks after dad when he's sick, and they think they do things together. They travel together. Do all sorts of things together. But there's not a lot of closeness there. But that's the fundamental, and they are an example of a good marriage. And this shows us how desensitized we become to any emotional pain, and how and naturally, if we're desensitized to emotional pain, we have to, at some point, when the body starts exhibiting physical pain, we are also going to be highly likely desirous of being desensitized to that as well. Which is also the reason why drug companies make a lot of profits on the planet. Right? Because we want desensitization. We're happy for them to create desensitization. When we get depressed, which is really anger, instead of feeling it, we'd rather take a pill. We would. We'd rather not work through the depression. We'd rather take a pill. Now, I've got no problem with a person desiring to take a pill if that's what they choose to do with their life, understanding what the results are. It's not something I would do. But if you think about it, taking the pill, rather than dealing with it, is a lot easier, isn't it? It's seemingly on the outside, taking a pill once a day is a lot easier than dealing with a problem. That's what the average person on earth thinks. This is what many of you still think, that doing something to avoid the problem is easier than dealing with the problem. But economy, the principles of economy state that if you don't deal with a problem, it just gets worse. Right? So, if you were truly interested in economy, you would deal with problems, emotional ones, right? Because they become the source of your other problems. So you deal with them, right? But the average person does not want to, for all sorts of reasons. And so we do need to have discussions about the reasons why you don't want to deal with emotions, the reasons why you want addictions. These discussions are important for your relationship with God because they prevent your relationship with God. Not only do they do that, but they also make your life very uneconomical. You know, you put an effort into something and it's not going to turn out very well because there's a whole heap of reasons why you don't really want it to go well. Right, so you sort of work the lack. Most of us don't realise that the lack of economy is also in the fact that we have a lot of emotions that are opposite to what we think. Right? And so we often undermine even what we've chosen as a course of action in our life because the emotions are undermining that course of action, and we have no idea that's happening because we're completely insensitive emotionally. And this is why when I read the Bible when I was in the first century, and I read, I've obviously read the Bible quite a lot of times, obviously, because it's purports to be based upon half of it purports to be based upon my life, and the second part, the first half of it, is what I grew up with in the first century, right? And I was educated by the priest, you could say, but not in this, not in the Sanhedrin or anything, but I was educated by just people that we went along to our local synagogue and was educated by those people. And in the process of that education, and you start reading what it contains, you start realising there's all these little hints everywhere about where human problems begin. And one of the hints is contained in the book of Jeremiah in the Old Testament. It says that the heart of the stone must be turned into a heart of flesh. And I'm looking at that verse, and I'm very young, and looking at that verse going, yeah, I can see, like my parents are like, my father, heart of stone. He had a heart of stone. There was no sensitivity. By the time I was 30 in this life, I had a heart of stone, really. And I go, well, there's one of the biggest problems. God wants to soften us up so we become more sensitive. So the more sensitive we are emotionally, the more rapidly we'll deal with problems. Can you see that? Like if you could feel there was a problem and you could feel it and it hurt, wouldn't it make sense then to deal with it? So the more sensitive we are emotionally, the more rapidly we're going to deal with problems. So when I look at a verse like that, I'm going, not only is God willing to gift us his love to soften us, but he also wants to do it so that we become more sensitive, more emotionally sensitive, more spiritually sensitive to what's going on around us. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about today a little was spirit influence and stuff like that. And it's one of the things we want to get onto in a minute. We'll get onto that subject.
It's sort of interesting that we've both come with the intention last week and this week to talk about negative spirit influence with you guys. Yeah. But each week it keeps getting shifted to something. Keeps getting shifted to something else. And the main reason why even that happens is because most of you do not want to know what's happening around you. You do not want to know. And of course, for that reason, you are clueless. And of course,
because you're clueless, there's all these negative influences that are going on in your life, and you got no idea that they're happening. Therefore, you don't know what to do with them or do about them. Therefore, they're going to continue. So, can you see it's the same problem? The problem is if you had sensitivity, you'd be going, oh, I can feel I'm getting influenced or pushed in this direction, and I'm getting influenced and pushed in that direction. And particularly if you had some moral sensitivity. Do you know what I mean by moral sensitivity? Where you're sensitive to what God's truth actually is. If you had any of that, you would be going, oh, I can feel this influence is out of harmony with that. The influence I'm getting here is out of harmony with being focused on God's truth. So many of you believe that you have been listening to Divine Truth for a while, and you think you understand it, and you know, like what I feel is you know nothing of it, right? And often the more arrogant you are, the less you know. because there's a huge amount of desensitization that's occurred, and you're not aware of how insensitive you've become. Right? And then as a result of that, the insensitivity means you're now insensitive to your feelings, you're insensitive to other people's feelings, you're insensitive to God's feelings, you're insensitive to what God feels the truth is, and then on top of that, you're insensitive to all the spirit influence that's around you. And while you remain so insensitive, and on top of that, very sensitive about your addictions not getting met, it is now so easy to influence you. So easy. It's just like, I often think of it like, you imagine there's this steep hill and there's the car stopped at the top of the hill, and all you got to do is just push it with your finger. It's so finely balanced, you can just push it with your finger and it's going to go off the cliff because of the hill, and the slope. If there's enough push to overcome the resistance to the momentum, then it's just going to keep rolling and speed up until it's an out of control thing, right? That's what you are. You're many of us on earth are like on a precipice of balance, and it won't take much, just a tiny little push like that, and you're off the cliff by this stage. And when I say off the cliff, you're off the cliff where you've broken the law, God's law, to your own detriment and the detriment of others. You've sinned, and it just takes a little tiny nudge, a little tiny nudge. And most of you are getting these little tiny nudges like every 2 seconds or 5 minutes or whatever in the course of a day, and you don't realise just getting these little nudges taking you further away from God, further away from truth. And it doesn't take much to just nudge you, like just little things, right? You go to a restaurant and they don't give you what you want. You ordered cake and you got ice cream or something, That's all it takes for most people to get unloving in the Western Hemisphere. Hardly anything at all. It doesn't take much, and we're instantly unloving. It's like, now the kind of spirits that are around, divine truth getting started on earth, they're more intent than giving you just a little nudge. They're not just going to give you a little nudge. These spirits are going to go, no, you're going that direction, I'm pushing you. And if you've got no moral sensitivity, you're just going to go in the direction they want. And many of you do. I notice many of you do it. So what are you going to do about that? The way to fix that is to become more sensitive. And the way to become more sensitive the fastest is to receive God's love.
Because it makes you not only more sensitive to your emotions and the spirit's emotions, but also that moral sensitivity is developed. You need that as well.
It's a sensitivity to what's right and wrong.
Yes, because some people are very in touch with their negative spirit influence. They go, I just felt that I should do it. My guides told me. And it's negative influence.
Yeah.
Just wondering if we might have
a wee break.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry.
Did you turn that? I didn't.
The recording?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
If I would be having a friend or my partner or someone that is in the physical world to try to influence me, would I be would I have the same sensitivity as I would have from a spirit?
Yeah, you would. In fact, more, because you can see them. You know, obviously, to feel how a spirit is influencing you, you have to be sensitive enough to feeling things you can't see. Right? But in terms of person on earth, it's really easy. There's a lot of science, isn't there, with regard to what they're trying or attempting to do, that you can see through their actions and their course of behaviour and how they interact with other people and so forth. And you can see it all happening. Many of us cover over, of course, but you can't cover over everything because you have to interact with other people in the world. So yes, you end up, if you're really sensitive, you can actually feel the inclination of the person, not just what they do, but why they chose to do it or what they're going to do, what their intention is to do. Right? Now, as you can be aware, if you have that information at your disposal, it now makes your life very easy. It's very easy to make different decisions and choices, isn't it? Particularly if you want to make moral ones, you can make different decisions and choices based on the knowledge you have. Majority of us don't want to know anything that's going on around us. For the most part, we don't. And this is why the majority of you don't know what's going on around you spiritually, because you just don't want to know. You don't want to know how dark it is at times, how malicious it is at times, how a lot of the things that you think are good about your life, somebody else is actually doing for you. You don't want to know. You don't want to see how these things. You don't want to acknowledge when you're being held positive because you want to believe it's all you. And you don't want to acknowledge when you are making decisions that are negative and you want to believe it's all somebody else's fault. Right? So there's a whole heap of things we don't want to know. Now, the more sensitive you become, you not only become sensitive to what's actually observing what's going on physically, but now you're also sensitive to what's going on sexually, what's going on emotionally, what's going on spiritually, what's going on with the beliefs and intentions of the person, why those beliefs and intentions are along a certain vein. And the more sensitive you become, the more you don't need to see the person. Right? You need to meet them, and when I say meet them, you need to generally meet the person either in spirit or on earth in order to start to know what's going on. In other words, I don't know what's going on with any of the people I haven't met. I can feel a collective thing of what's going on, but I can't feel the specifics of what's going on. But as soon as I meet them, I can. So when people email me, there's people who email me from overseas say, you should know, if you were Jesus, you would know, what I'm feeling and thinking. And I'm going, well, I've never met you. How, I can't even feel the personality and nature of the individual enough to know who it is yet. So how am I going to know anything else after that? Once I meet you, yes, that is true. But if I haven't met you, then it's impossible, really, because I haven't met you yet, right?
A spirit would have to meet them and tell you.
Yes.
That's how mediums
do their work.
Yeah.
The spirit goes there and checks out Corny and says, this is what he's got, this is what's going on, this is what he did, and then comes and tells somebody. And that's how other people get to know. I don't do that. I don't rely on any spirit to tell me anything about somebody else. I firstly rely on my own relationship with God and my assessment based on what's going on morally from that relationship. That's how I assess things. Right? So quite often spirits will come to me and say one thing and I go, well, that's not entirely what I feel. What I feel is this other thing going on. And then we talk about that, and then often that turns out to be true. But it's about developing the sensitivity between you and God. Now, God's connected to all people. So if you're sensitive to God, eventually, if you're really interested in another person, God can share things about them with you. And God's okay doing that. God, if you're really interested in helping others, if you're interested in harming them, God doesn't want to have a bar of you, right? right? But if you're interested in helping them, so if you're interested in meeting their addictions, that's harming them, right? God doesn't want to share that with you. He wants to share no knowledge with you on that regard. But if you're interested in helping them and helping them grow towards God, then God will tell you as much as you need to know to help the person do that, right? So again, it gets down to intention and desire and passion and longing on your part, in whether that's sincere, as to whether God can communicate. But it's a lot better, if God exists, of course, this all dependent on, right? But it's a lot better to be able to hear God on the matter than anybody else on the matter. And if you're sensitive to that, then things can progress rapidly. This is why I'm encouraging you first to pray for God's love. And also, while I'm also saying these are the things that are stopping you from receiving it. These things are stopping you. Lauren, if we have the mic over.
I feel like I have experienced just a complete not wanting to know about spirits. I can absolutely acknowledge that.
Yeah.
I also am wondering how, for my heart beating, I feel like I get a little bit a lot overwhelmed on how to actually deal with it, because I feel like it's almost like I just feel this like barrage of like it's like I'll be clear and then all of a sudden even driving here it's like intense overwhelm of noise, and it's like it makes my vision blurry and my head foggy and it's just completely and entirely overwhelming. And
this is one reason why there's not a lot of people listening to Divine Truth at the moment, because every time somebody tries to, they get this barrage of stuff coming from spirits who are trying to prevent the growth of God's truth on earth. And so the person goes, well, this is how bad it is, even thinking about visiting Jesus and Mary for a day or so, then why would I want to do that? You know, I would rather comfort. I would rather back off, you know. So this is the kind of pressure that many people get under when they're presented with the opportunity to hear God's truth. Yep. The question becomes, well, why does that happen? And why can't I prevent it? Well, obviously, God's perfectly happy for you to prevent it, if that's what you could do. But how do I prevent it? So the question then becomes, well, how are these spirits having an influence? And by what mechanisms can they manipulate in you to get you to the state where even your own sight goes blurry, rather than, you know, and you get headaches and all sorts of other problems, all physical symptoms, just contemplating to listen to Divine Truth for a day, you know. And there are so many people in this state where, you know, they come for a day, they get hammered by these quite dark influences, and then they go, well, you know, the atmosphere around that Jesus and Mary is very dark, and so we can't see them anymore. And I've said many times, of course the atmosphere around us is very dark. There's a lot of spirits in the spirit world who don't want us to do what we're doing. And so naturally the atmosphere is going to be dark for a while until these spirits realise they have very little power to stop it. But at the moment they feel they have plenty of power to stop it. All they've got to do is just hammer a person for a bit, and the average person will go, wow, this is sort of too hard now, you know. Now, in the case of some of you, you can start to feel your persistence in wanting to know more build, and then you get hammered more. You know? And then you get to a stage where you're going to have a breakthrough, emotionally, where you have a sensitivity breakthrough, and you'll be able to feel the emotions that are causing the openness to their hammering, if you like. And once that happens, then things you'll feel completely different after that. You won't, so I feel a lot, I can feel all of the things going on around me, but I don't respond to it very much. You know, there's occasions where I do, but it's fairly rare, and most of the time it's only if I am trying to deny an emotion within myself. Yep, that's when something happens.
In fact, you know, it's not really the atmosphere around you, it's really around the individual. So spirits can see where there's openings in individuals, and they're different for different people, and they just start working on those openings. So eventually, if, say, everyone in this room reached a certain point in humility, then it'd be completely different atmosphere, because there would be no openings for spirits to come and sort of prey on. Yeah.
Yep. So the answer is to, okay, what emotionally is causing the opening? Now, I understand that you might want to close it all down, which is what you've done in your life, because if I close it all down, then I can sort of just ignore it all and get on with my life. So this is how the average person lives. The average person tries to become less sensitive to what's going on around them. The net result of that is, though, you're also less sensitive to your husband, you're less sensitive to your children, you're less sensitive to your friends, you're less sensitive. You don't know what's going on with any of them, because the senses you need to detune from in order to detune from the spirits that are around you are, unfortunately, the exact same senses that you need to have relationships with people on earth. And so in the end, the net result is that we detune more and more from those relationships as well, not understanding, not seeing, and we start interacting with everybody on a very physical level. So based upon what they do and what they say, rather than what they feel. You know, we don't. In fact, the majority of person will say to you, "But I didn't say that. I said this." But I don't go. But that's not what you feel. You know, what you feel is this other thing. You know, and if a person's honest, they'll often admit that. But very rarely are they honest. So they're even trying to tell themselves they don't feel things. And they're trying. And in the end, we're getting to the stage on Earth where everybody is interacting on this very physical level, just basically looking at behaviour and action,
words,
but no acknowledgement of the underlying feelings driving it. So an example of that is, I've got this really friendly man and he's really friendly with me, but actually he's sexually predatory. But you think he's friendly, right? And you can't feel he's sexually a predator because you've detuned from all of the senses that would tell you that. And so you end up going, and then he says, "I'm a friendly man and I want to help you." And he acts like he's a friendly man and just wants to help you, and you go, "Well, that's what I'm going to trust, because I can't trust anything else. I don't want the other senses of my soul." Remember last week we talked about, and you weren't here, Lauren, but last week we talked about the soul has its own senses that get developed as you receive God's love. And those senses, for the most part on earth, the average person is completely dead with those senses. It's like they don't exist in them anymore. And those senses, which we need to actually be fully protected, to be fully engaged in life, to be fully desirous, to be, to even have a full relationship, we've detuned from so much that now everything we do is just dependent upon the action and the words. And that's it. And so that's all we're assessing. And so what I notice for many of you, and particularly most of the men, is that when I say, "Oh, this is actually what is going on," you can look at me like I'm an idiot and strange, because you think it's completely different, because it's not what the person said. It's not how they behave towards you. And so you don't feel what's going on. You don't feel it at the soul level. It's impossible to feel it when you're desensitized. Now, obviously, if we're going to solve our problems with spirits, we are going to have to be more sensitive. But the trouble is, at the beginning, the more you become more sensitive, the more you realise how dark it is around you, and it becomes a bit scary. And then it also becomes, well, how do I deal with that? And you start getting afraid and start getting worried. And when you start getting afraid and worried, then what you start doing is go, maybe the better course of action is to just go back to being numb again. But actually, the spirits around you, particularly, those that are dark, spirits around you, want you to be numb. It's only the bright spirits who want you to be open. The dark spirits want you to be numb. They want you to be emotionally desensitized, because that's when they can influence you the most.
Yeah, and I feel like even when I switch off even more, it's like I actually just feel even more darkness and more fear. It's like I feel more of that than...
Because you're enabling it more by saying, I'm not going to feel, I don't want to know, I don't know. You actually open yourself more and more.
It's like I'm choosing.
And they're like, oh, there's more opening.
And they feel encouragement. You're actually gifting them power over you by doing that. And so they feel encouraged by that. A person generally who feels encouraged by their action will continue it, and often continue it even more strongly, won't they? So if a bully feels encouraged, does he back off after he's encouraged? No, he will bully you more, you know. And remember that many our dark spirit friends, you know, that are our brothers and sisters that are injured but also quite evil at times, they feel like a bully. They want to do damage, and it's only those that have grown in love that want to do different. The interesting thing, though, is the more we detune with our sensitivity, the less we feel the people who are more sensitive. And our spirit friends who are loving are more sensitive. That's how they became more loving, actually. They became more loving by becoming more sensitive. Right? They became more loving as a result of being sensitive to what was unloving, and then changing their desires and goals and behaviour based on what they were sensitive to. That makes sense to you? Right?
Yeah. I'm just wondering as well, would I also need to look at the emotional reasons as to why I'm wanting to avoid...
Yeah, of course. Yeah. But that is also about you not wanting to be sensitive to your own feelings. Yeah. Can you see that? It's sort of like, how do I open up to become aware? Well, I have actually got to be... the problem is if I open up emotionally and become more sensitive emotionally, I'm going to be more sensitive to my own problems. I'm going to be more sensitive to the problems of others. I'm going to be more sensitive to love, but I'm also going to be more sensitive to hate. I'll be more sensitive to truth, but I'll also be more sensitive to lies, right? And so forth. So the majority of persons go, wow, if I'm more sensitive, there's all this extra information coming at me. Like, how am I going to deal with that? How am I going to cope with that? And for the most part, most of us don't want to go through the emotions that will eventually result in us coping, not just coping, but thriving, actually, even in an environment that's unloving. Most of us don't want to go through the emotions. We instead want to go, well, if I'm going to become more sensitive to God, that also means that I'm going to become more sensitive to my husband and my children and my own feelings, and also more sensitive to wicked spirits, but also more sensitive to, you know, bright spirits, and it's all going to get pretty full on out there, you know. Yeah. And for most of us, we go, well, how much can I handle? Is a feeling we have, and the reality is God wants you to be able to handle everything. But the average person says, well, how much can I handle? I don't know if I can handle that much. So I will control how sensitive I become. Now, in doing that, you're controlling how much love you're going to receive from God as well, naturally. And how much love you're going to receive from your partner and your children and your friends, and even how much love you're going to have for yourself. You're going to have to control that as well. So the lack of emotional sensitivity, the lack of spiritual sensitivity, sexual sensitivity, and physical sensitivity. So you can see every one of the major core aspects of our life, the more desensitized we become, the more there's going to be problems in every one of those areas of my life. So if I become even just physically desensitized, I won't recognise when I hurt myself. And I've seen people have big blisters and they don't see them for days. You know, why is that? Because it's just they're so desensitized to their physical body now that they can't even notice that it's in pain. Even though if they tuned in, they'd be able to feel it, but they can't. They don't notice it. And then you go, well, what about sexually? Well, there's so many things going on in the planet sexually, isn't there, that are out of harmony with love. That's quite obvious out of harmony with love, and yet the average person is very detuned from it. So they have an interaction with the opposite gender. Very rarely is it based on a friendship or a loving interaction. For the most part, it's like based on addiction at the minimum, and then it gets really downright sexually sleazy for the most part, you know what I mean? And that's how it is for most people, and particularly if the person's viewed as if they're attractive. So then it's like full on. And the same applies emotionally and spiritually. We have all these issues and problems that result from that. So the goal is to become emotionally sensitive and spiritually sensitive and sexually sensitive and physically sensitive. But you can see the majority of us don't want sensitivity in any of those areas of our life, right? And as a result, we become more and more numb, but also more and more easily controlled. Because our fear now is governing our life. Our fear of being sensitive, our fear of knowing what's going on governs our life. So when you see this in world events and everything, where big world events happen and the average person buries their head in the sand. Like there are huge world events have happened, you know, historically, where the average person that are maybe not what you'd classify as a conspiracy, because a lot of events just occur because of addictions. They're not. It's very hard for large groups of dark spirits to conspire because they all disagree with each other. So most of the time it happens just through addictions. But the average person on earth goes completely numb to all of the influences and all of the darkness that's there because they want to believe everything's better. And, you know, we want to live in an illusion. Because while I'm in an illusion, I don't have to feel about any of it. Yeah? Makes sense? Okay, so Sush?